Evolution is the changing of the alleles in a population over time. A theory is something that explains the laws that occur in nature. Theories can be used to make predictions. Now, I've talked about evolution. I'm going to carry on, trying to make it understandable. And to begin with, I'm going to say, my father used to argue with me, not too much because didn't argue too much with my father. But he would argue with me and he would badmouth evolution every time I was around him if the subject came up. I tended to respect him, and when he started, I wouldn't argue with him because to argue with him would get me shut down. He was very good at shutting things down. But one time, after I had been there and we were discussing evolution and he was talking bad about it, I told him that if somebody was going to talk bad about something, maybe he should read something about it. If he was going to talk bad about Charles Darwin and what Charles Darwin did, maybe he should read what Charles Darwin had written. It might be helpful. Now, my father was an old farmer, and he did know how to read, and he did read. And the next time I went back, his attitudes had changed completely. I am assuming that he did what I said and he read about Charles Darwin and read some of the works of Charles Darwin and learned about what he had been bad-mouthing and had to change his mind, because when people read the material that they're bad-mouthing, they change their mind, because you cannot have knowledge of what goes on in nature and be against evolution. It is an obvious thing. He had experienced it on the farm. Everything in his life was about selective breeding. Everything in all of our lives are about selective breeding. In fact, his father, my grandfather, after he had stopped farming, still had a sack of seeds that he had been collecting through the years. And he would go out in the cotton plant where it would normally have one flower. If it had two flowers or two bolls, he would take those seeds so that he could start a crop of cotton seeds that had twice as much yield. He was doing that still. He still had the stuff even after he had stopped farming. It was hanging down there in the barn or in the garage. My father knew that all old farmers, all old ranchers did selective breeding. Selective breeding is something that is a basic part of what farmers do, and it's based upon evolution, which is the selection, and that's what Charles Darwin had observed. He had observed it in all of the different varieties of cabbage and farm animals, and he saw it also occurred in nature. And he made predictions about what would happen if you could find enough fossils. But Charles Darwin missed a few things. He didn't know what we know today. He didn't know that these traits were carried on chromosomes. He didn't know that these alleles were things that could be transferred and how they were transferred. He just observed that they were. His contemporaries didn't all agree with him, and some of them were prone to telling him that his ideas wouldn't hold water anyway, because if you had something that just by chance was born spectacularly more capable of surviving, that those genes would just get watered back down into the population and couldn't be selected for. They would just be diluted back out again, and it wouldn't make any difference in the long run. Well, Darwin knew better because he had seen the consequences of selective breeding. He knew that you could select for those traits. He knew that they didn't blend back in, and he knew that they didn't disappear because he saw that farmers had been able to do that. The problem was that he didn't know how. And he did lots and lots and lots of stuff. Now, everybody knows that groups of people want to maintain a status. They want to be thinking that they are better than everybody else and all of the other animals. And this is a problem that Darwin ran into. It's a problem we run into today. People think that they are so much better than everything and everybody. They have this idea that they have to do that, and they get in gangs. We call these gangs religions. But they get in gangs to push and promote their agendas, which are basically reproducing. If they can reproduce enough, then they have more power than the other groups. At least that has been true in the past. It's not true so much anymore. But the larger the group is, the more power you have, the more you're able to push your agenda. Well, that part is still in force. We have a problem with people today in that not only do they want to join in groups that are overpopulating, overproducing, because now we have medicines and vaccines and different things to keep people alive, so no longer do we have to have the dense population we had to have in the past, because in the past most of them died of epidemics and other things anyway, and you had to have enough just to maintain. It's not true now. Now we have medicines, we have vaccines, we have all the different things to keep people alive. We know about sanitation, we know about the things that are necessary to keep people from dying, and we keep people alive long after they should have been allowed to die. And we do that because we care about people. And we build huge cities, we build dense populations with lots and lots of people in them. And these people are very isolated from their sources of nutrients. The farms and ranches, the sources of food, are isolated from the average person nowadays. Now people have generally no idea of where their food comes from. Unlike my father and grandfather, who raised the food, who knew where it came from, who were directly connected all the way back from them, all the way back through my grandfather's father and my grandfather's father's father, back to Darwin's time. And by the way, Darwin was born on the same day that Abraham Lincoln was. All the way back, people have been in contact with their food sources, but we are no longer in contact with our food sources. We no longer even know generally where our food comes except from the shelf of a store. With this problem, people don't have any idea that broccoli and cauliflower are related, that cabbage and Brussels sprouts are also related, that the Chinese cabbage is also related, that all of the other types of cabbage, and they don't know that these things go back to a common ancestor just less than 3,000 years ago. They don't know that the cotton has been greatly selected for. They don't know that the cattle of different types have been selected for. They don't know that the pigs and the chickens and all of the food sources that they have been selected for. And they can't tie that back into what happens in nature because they don't have anything to work from. However, they do have people getting up there, gang leaders, getting up there and telling them that they are special and that they need to make a lot more babies to support this operation so that they will have lots of money and lots of power, and that we are better than those other gangs over there, and we are better than those other animals out there. And how dare anyone say that we are related to the other animals? Well, Gregor Mendel, by the way, Darwin was a preacher. Gregor Mendel was a monk. And Gregor Mendel worked with pea plants. He had lots of time. He worked with pea plants, and he bred the pea plants, and he had to go through some really neat procedures to be able to cross them because the pea plants he was working with were self-pollinating, and they had different traits. And he went through several methods of doing things, and he crossed them and came up with hybrids. And then he would let them self-pollinate, and he would look at the consequences. And he collected data. He collected data for many, many, many different traits, and we now know that he was lucky. He was working with plants that had a different trait on different chromosomes. They were linked to different chromosomes. We know that now because we know about chromosomes now. He didn't know about that. He just knew that these traits were carried and kept within generations. And he proved what Darwin didn't know. Darwin knew was occurring, but Darwin couldn't prove. Well, Mendel proved it. He showed that these traits could be selected for, they could be kept within generations, even those that were recessive. He showed that you could keep them, you could breed for them, you could selectively keep them in a population, you could give them priority rights, and give them the capability of being the ones that were selected for. And so we now, with his knowledge, have been able to improve crops even more. But he, with his information, could have given Darwin a handle to be able to explain to the radical gangsters of his time who were trying to stop his work from occurring and trying to stop his knowledge from being available. This would have helped even more. It would have fixed if it would have gone, and he actually sent work to Darwin, but Darwin never obviously read it. But Darwin had actually done some work with pea plants too. He understood a lot, but he didn't have the data. With all of his collection of data, all of his collection of information, he didn't have the information to show why traits could be kept within a population and not watered down over the generations and disappear. Mendel gave him that capability, but Darwin was old, he didn't get it in, he didn't get it done, maybe he didn't even read it, maybe it was because it needed to be translated. Whatever the reason was, this had to be put together later. And it was. And now we know. We know why you don't lose these traits through the generations. We know why they are selected for. We know how they are passed on, and we know that's through the chromosomes. Mendel didn't know about chromosomes either. Maybe they were available to be seen in microscopes, but they didn't really know that these were the ones that carried the information. They didn't know about the alleles that could be selected for. They understood you could select, and Mendel showed that these things went in units and that these units could be selected for, and that these units could be caused to be increase in numbers in a population over time. Mendel and Darwin basically proved that evolution occurs, and they kind of together showed how it occurred. And we have been able to take this information that came from them and many other people that have done research. We've collected the data. The data can be observed by anyone, even if you have the courage to go back and read what Darwin said and then look at what Mendel did. You can find this out. The information is available. You don't have to go and say, this guy over here, this gang leader told me this, and because he said it, I believe it, and I want it to be that way because he appears to know what he's talking about. I mean, he claims, and he made the claim, so golly, he must know. He said Darwin said this. And if he said Darwin said that, then Darwin must have said that because he's obviously the authority. No, he's not. Go read where the information came from. These guys quote Darwin, they quote other people, and they don't take the whole thing. They just take little parts of it, the same as they do from their own gang book. They don't take the whole thing. And they give you information that is not true. They manipulate it to make it say what they want it to say because they want you to stay in their gang because they get power, influence, and money by having more people in their gangs. Don't follow these guys. Make your own decisions. Use your brain. You have a brain for a reason. Use your brain. If you can read, read. If you can't read, you might need to find somebody who can read, or one of these books that is read by a computer or something, and let it be read to you. You don't have to follow somebody who is just a silly, idiotic used car salesman trying to pad his own pockets and make his own life better at your expense and the expense of your children. Learn something. Do what my father did. Finally, at some point in your life, get out and read and learn about things instead of just making the claim that you know something you know nothing about. Evolution is the changing of the alleles in a population over time. Laws are things that occur. Theories are explanations of the laws, and they can be used as predictions. The theory of evolution is based upon things that happen in nature. Those would be called the laws. And the theory of evolution is an explanation, and it has been proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. And if you can prove that evolution doesn't occur, you're a greater person than so many millions of people who have tried in the past, including tons and tons of gang-leading preachers. They haven't been able to prove anything. All they've been able to do is lie about it. Don't join them.